Before I start this video, go check out Isamu Yamamoto's longboard dancing video at the top of the description. Freestyle skateboarding is a lot more niche than the rest of the sport, so I wanted to send some respect that way for the amazing board control it takes to do that stuff. Today, we're going to take a look at Grind Session. Some of you already knew this was coming, so good job for guessing that. We're also going to take a look at Razor Freestyle Scooter. Thank you to everybody who suggested these games. I know it might seem weird for me to cover these games as a pair, but trust me, it'll all make sense eventually. Let's get started. Grind Session, developed by Shaba Games in 2000, is a tech fantasy skateboarding game that shares a lot of similarity to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. This is actually the first game Shaba ever developed, but anybody who's been around the channel for a while will probably recognize them as the team that developed Wakeboarding Unleashed, as well as the PS1 port of Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX. They were building their foundation in action sports from the very beginning, and you can really see that in their later games. I couldn't really find much info about the development of the game, but what I did find completely changes my perspective going in. This review, archived from CNET, talks a little bit about the development, and in it I learned that this game took over 2 years to develop. It came out in May of 2000, so that would put the development starting point somewhere before May of 1998. Pro Skater didn't come out until September of 1999, so it's pretty much impossible for this game to be a Pro Skater clone. It may have taken some late-term inspiration, but that's about the extent of it. The career here is familiar enough if you've ever played a game like this before. Go from map to map completing goals to move on. The goals themselves are some familiar things, like getting a high in pro score, knocking over some stuff, and collecting some stuff. One of the new goals is tech lines. This goal is mostly there to teach you how to move from one object to the other, and it does a good job touring you around to get some of the most usable and well-made areas in your face a little bit. The next new goal isn't really a goal, but instead a dedicated game mode called Endurance, where you do a set of tricks that appear on screen sequentially. This actually reminds me a little of that mode from Pro Skater 5. The sets get bigger as each map progresses, and the final Endurance challenge is actually fairly difficult. There are a few different pro skaters, and a custom skater that isn't really custom but more just nameable. This entire career builds up to you opening every door in the Dream House, a huge skate mansion with some of the best object concentration in the game. There are also a bunch of secret skaters, and another level that can be unlocked by finishing the Endurance mode. Once you've earned enough respect, you'll unlock photo shoots that have you pull off a combo within a really short amount of time. Finishing those awards you with actual photos from the pro skaters. It's a very fleshed out single player experience, and it definitely feels like they made use of that 2-year development time. The gameplay here is stunning. If you've ever heard of this game but you've never played it, the thing you've probably been told repeatedly is that it's identical to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. That's only partially true. The control layout is effectively the same. Ollie, flip, grab, and grind are all mapped to the face buttons that you would use in Pro Skater. It's the mechanics themselves that are a lot different. To grind, you have to hold the triangle button, and grinds can be carried for an insanely long amount of time. You can chain multiple tricks and grinds together on the same rail for a long time without the balance meter going insane. Flip trick outworks in a really interesting way. Your thumbs will sort of emulate the motion that legs make when you pop down on the tail. You kind of have to swipe your thumb down from triangle to hit square and cross at the same time, and then just after that, tap the direction on the D-pad as if you were kicking the board in that direction. You can hit the direction first, but I actually found that it was much more accurate to do it late. Tricks often registered more often, and I didn't have to worry about flying away from the rail. In the way of tricks, you've got everything you would expect. Single, double, and multi-direction flips and grabs and lip tricks, multiple different grinds, and so on. You can also no-comply, nollie, and boneless by holding cross and tapping the directions, and hitting square or triangle right as you release. Again, this kind of weird techie control to move your hands in a way that emulates the legs on a real skateboard is something really different. It adds a lot of depth to what otherwise would just be a button masher. Something else that's very different is timing and weight for grabs. Grabs take a long time to prep, so you can't use them on the flat or on low rails. You actually have to use ramps to get high air to do grabs, and you have to angle yourself for good spins, which isn't really a bad thing. It creates a real separation between vert and street skating, which is something Pro Skater never really did. This game is called Grind Session, so it really emphasizes doing those super long grinds as the basis for your combos. If you fill up your possession meter before you start a grind, you can carry that grind on for even longer than you normally could, which means you can actually get these massive 100k point combos without having to destroy your thumbs. One new mechanic that Grind Session introduces to the formula is manuals. This game did manual tricks before Pro Skater 2. It isn't the same kind of manual. It moves in a straight line and it doesn't have a balance meter, so you have to use it as the very last trick in a combo for it to be the most meaningful. But it has them. Another thing this game did first is hip transfers. You can automatically transfer transfer over some small hips just by moving around them, and that's years ahead of its time. We didn't get hip transfers in Tony Hawk until Underground. As levels move on, you unlock more tricks to mess around with like Thrash and Destroy. But instead of just getting a couple of new tricks that the game wants to give you, you'll usually get to pick from one of a few different tricks. The way this all works makes each playthrough feel different. There are still a lot of things I'm learning about this game, but I did manage to take some of the top score spots on retro achievements, so I'm pretty confident that I covered most of it. Man, this game is good. Visually, Grind Session always has a lot of objects on screen at once. It's really impressive, but there's one major problem and one minor inconvenience. The biggest problem is that this game slows down pretty often. It really pushes the PS1 to its limits. The minor inconvenience is that the game calls everything that isn't in front of you. Using the widescreen patch, we can see where the draws stop happening, and it looks like it's tile by tile. I know enough about game development to know that constantly calling new draws is really heavy. The reason they did this was so the forward draw distance could be further, but I said in my review of Pro Skater 4 for the PS1 that I would rather have less draw distance for more objects and better gameplay. From a development perspective, the visuals are pretty bad, but from a player perspective, this game actually looks a lot better than most other PS1 games. The models and textures are a lot cleaner and more identifiable than some other things I've played from the same console, which makes sense considering this game came out in 2000. The PS2 was already out in Japan by the time this game was released. The last visual thing I want to talk about is the map design. They're all good, and they range in size from medium to massive, but there's one map here that stands out above all of the others: Burnside. In Pro Skater, Burnside is a meme. It's extremely small, and there's nothing there to really get creative or get any momentum going. In Grind Session, Burnside is actually a really good map, with multiple areas, a hidden rail, and because of the different mechanics, the area that they share is much better to play here. This is the kind of respect that Burnside actually deserves, and it's awesome to see. It's also awesome to skate Burnside while playing as Karabeth Burnside. For those of you who don't know, CB Burnside is the first female professional skateboarder. She started out skating in the men's division, and eventually she became the first woman to get featured on the cover of Thrasher, as well as the first female skater to get a pro shoe deal. Her only other video game appearance is Tony Hawk Ride, which is a damn shame because her legacy is one that deserves to be immortalized properly, and I think this game does just that. The soundtrack here is really one of a kind. Like most other action sports games, the theme is stuff you might hear a skater listening to, but this one digs really deep and throws down some of the most obscure and classic punk rock ever released. You get bands like Man or Astro Man, Zen Gorilla, Black Flag, and Sonic Youth. There's also some great hip-hop here like Publicity by GZA, which is a song I used in a previous video, or Jayu by Jurassic 5, which just goes really hard. Every song in the soundtrack fits perfectly, and it's long enough to match the length of the game. This one quickly became one of my favorites. The last thing I want to talk about here is the real-world skate footage. This game has one of the most impressive varieties of real skateboarding footage and photos, and it's all fucking gnarly. The compression is pretty bad, but that doesn't even matter because the clips themselves are second to none. There's even a whole chunk dedicated to the real TC's roof gap, which is incredibly rare and hard to find. This is some of the best skateboarding footage ever included in one of these games, and I appreciate that a lot. With all of that said, I'll go ahead and give Grind Session a rating of 9 out of 10. There are so many reasons this game gets a high rating, but above all of those, I'm happy to know that it's not just a Pro Skater clone. There are a lot of things that this game does differently and better than Pro Skater 1. And since it came out before Pro Skater 2, it also does a lot of things first. I'm happy to set the record straight on that for anybody who thought it was just some copy made to capitalize on the popularity. Grind Session is an extremely respectful passion project that shows a lot of love and effort from the development team, and it changes enough of what's familiar to be an entirely different game. I have a totally new respect for Shaba Games. They genuinely gave a shit about the quality of their tribute. This was their first game, and I don't think they could have made a better entrance. I recommend digging into this one if you never have. It's easily accessible, fun to play today, and now it's abandonware 20 years later, so just emulate it at your leisure. I'm really glad I checked this one out. Next game up, Razor Freestyle Scooter, developed by Shaba Games in 2000, is technically a Grind Session spin-off. Freestyle Scooter was developed in just 7 months, and it exists at all because Razor really wanted to capitalize on the success of these action sports games on the market. And Crave Entertainment really also liked to make quick money. The first time I heard of this game was a Brutal Moose video, and I'm willing to bet a few of you out there heard about it in the exact same way. This game is one of the many reasons I don't trust other critics. His opinions aren't wrong, and he goes into some detail about the game. I just disagree with most of it and think he really didn't do any looking into it or what it was. I have the grounds to disagree because I actually put the effort into playing the game and learning about the history. The career mode here is the same as it always is. Go from map to map completing goals to move on, but there's a little bit of a story to go along with all of it. A giant robot is kidnapped all of your friends, and he wants you to do some gnarly scooting to earn their freedom. On the surface, this game has a very shovelware appearance, but underneath that is a genuinely good game with a lot of interesting things going on. Some of the goals are things you might expect, like getting a high in pro score, getting a high combo, and collecting stuff. There's also some unique ideas, like grinding for a certain distance, or adding 100 seconds of bonus time to the clock. There are no pro scooter riders in this game, and that can be attributed to the fact that there really were no pro scooter riders when this game came out. Freestyle Scooter actually pioneers a lot of the ideas that would eventually become real pro shit. 90% of the tricks you see in this game had never been done when this game came out, and the other 10% still never happened in the real world. Real talk. When have you ever seen a pro scooter rider do a hand plant? If you have, tell me about it in the comments. It just doesn't happen, though. I never see that. This game is genuinely impressive for being the pioneer foundation of an entire sport. In the way of gameplay, this game is literally Grind Session. I know the big comparison is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but we've already confirmed that Grind Session is not a Pro Skater clone. That's really the most impressive thing about this game. They could have changed it to look more like Pro Skater and the style of gameplay there, and they could have gotten rid of the hold triangle for grind and shit, but they didn't. They had full faith in the Grind Session format, and I really appreciate that. There are some things I wish this game included, like landing fakie. I didn't know that was 100% possible because X-Blade's Inline Skater has fakie. The real difference between this game and Grind Session is the trick variety. Freestyle Scooter only has 1/3 of the trick list size from Grind Session. Every rider has different tricks, so there's a good variety, but there's a lot of untapped potential. Some of the double and multi-direction inputs have absolutely nothing mapped to them, which is really a shame. That being said, this game was developed in just 7 months, and I'm pretty sure most of that was spent figuring out what a scooter was even capable of, so it's completely forgivable. This game is perfectly playable and feels really good. There were never any moments where I felt like the collision was broken or I was struggling because of bad design. This whole game works, and it works really well. Visually, Freestyle Scooter looks like shovelware, because it is. It had a super low budget, an extremely small development time, and there was no foundation to build it on like there was with skateboarding. But just being shovelware doesn't instantly make a game bad. There's a lot of really good shovelware out in the wild, like Skate Attack. Shovelware just has a very distinct look about it that can be very misleading to anybody who just looks at stuff. This game has bad art, bad character models, terrible menus, and some pretty bad textures. But the maps themselves are designed and laid out really well, and the gameplay is solid enough to counterbalance the weaknesses. Video games are like food. It doesn't really matter if it looks bad if it tastes good. To that point, this funny looking piece of shovelware is responsible for creating most of an extreme sport, so I have to give it credit for the legacy also. We really wouldn't have pro scooter riders today without this game, and I think that's bigger than any visuals or menus. This game means something, and that's not something you find very often. Since there's no real scooter footage in this game, the last thing I'll talk about is the soundtrack. This has to be the single most obscure emo punk mix I've ever heard in my life. The actual style of music is a lot of stereotypes that sometimes fit in really well, and other times are just totally fucking ridiculous. The bands include Slick Shoes, Sick Shift, 3 Foot, and No Use for a Name as the ones that I recognize. But then there's a bunch of unfamiliar stuff like X Number 5, Sloppy Meat Eaters, and Zombie Smashers X2. I don't particularly dislike any of it, most of it is fine. It just has absolutely nothing to do with skating or scooting or whatever. There's no theme beyond obscure emo punk, and the majority of it is breakup songs. What the fuck does that have to do with scooting? With all of that said, I'll go ahead and give Razor Freestyle Scooter a rating of 6 out of 10. It's a good game, believe me, I wish I could say something better about it, but at its core it's a lot like Pro Skater 5. The gameplay is good, but cut down. It was rushed out really fast. The visuals aren't the best of their time, but the maps themselves have great layouts. There's a really good game buried under the shovelware skin that this game is cursed with. I feel like a modern Freestyle Scooter featuring real pros like R. Willie would be a lot more successful because there's a much better foundation for the sport today. It doesn't have to be shovelware anymore because there are real pros, real tricks, really gnarly shit happening in the world of scooters every day. This game should be looked back on fondly because it really is the pioneer of so many ideas, and the gameplay is good. It just isn't great overall. There's so much room for something better. I hope at some point in the future we get a scooter game like this because the sport deserves a lot more respect than it gets for how insane it is. Now that I'm done with all of that, I think I need a short break away from PS1 graphics. I'm still keeping the focus on gameplay games you request, but there are quite a few that I recognize and I'm eager to talk about from the PlayStation 2 era. This time I won't give too much away. I have to be surprising once in a while just to keep things exciting around here. So until next time, thank you and have a nice day.